So we're going to talk about quadratics. And if we look at a quadratic equation like this, we can pretty quickly tell that the vertex is 2, 1, axis of symmetry is x equals 2, and this graph opens up. But if we look here, well, I don't really know what the graph is. But if I graphed it on my calculator, right, it's in standard form. If I graphed it on my calculator, I would observe, what do you know? It has the same vertex, the same axis of symmetry, and the same direction of opening. It's the same. So in number 1, if I took that equation and I FOILed it out, wouldn't I just get x squared minus 4x plus 4 minus 1? Oops, x squared minus 4x, 4x plus 4 minus 1. So I would get the same thing, x squared minus 4x plus 3. It's the same equation, so that's like a big reveal, right? They're exactly the same. And which one would we prefer? Well, we would probably prefer this one. So that's why we call that one, I call it graphing form or sometimes vertex form. Graphing or vertex form. So if we want to change from standard form or from graphing form to standard form, we just FOIL it out. But what we're going to learn is how to go backwards. So what we're showing you here is the process. First, we're going to put those two terms aside. X squared minus 4x, kind of leave a blank, and we're going to leave a blank on the other side. Then we're going to complete the square. Half the middle term squared is 4, which is going to add to both sides. But remember, in standard form, the y is alone. So we're going to subtract 4 from both sides to get that y alone. And now I can just factor that, x minus 2 quantity squared, and of course 3 minus 4 is 1. So we're going to follow that same procedure a few times here till we get the hang of it. So in the first one, I have x squared minus 10x, leave a blank, plus 21. You want to leave a blank on both sides. Half the middle term squared, 25, but the 25 has to get moved over, so it becomes minus 25. So I have x minus 5 squared minus 4. And I could graph that and stuff, and we will on the homework, but for right now we're just going to change the equation. Here, y equals x squared plus 6x, leave the blank on both sides, plus 4. Half the middle term squared is 9, move it over. And you're going to see pretty quickly that, like, you're going to get this, right? This is kind of the same thing over and over again. But it can get harder, obviously, especially when the middle term is an odd number. What's half of 3? Well, half of 3 is 3 halves. Squared is 9/4. And you want to add that as a fraction to both sides. Oops, I didn't do it in a different color. And then move that fraction over, which can be challenging because it's a fraction. So I have y equals x plus 3 halves squared. And then here, negative 7 is not the same thing as negative 28/4. Minus 9/4 is negative 37/4. And you can do that on a calculator if needed. So those first ones don't have a leading coefficient, right? The hardest one was odd. And then we get to this row, and you see what we're doing is we're showing this leading coefficient. So we're going to factor the leading coefficient out of only the first two. That's important. I purposely made this a negative 1 so you wouldn't be tempted, but even if that was a negative 8, you would not factor on both sides, factor out of that. Now when I do half the middle term squareds of 4, but watch. It's inside parentheses with a 2, so I'm going to add 8 to the other side to keep it balanced and subtract 8 from both sides. So I get y equals 2x plus 2 squared minus 9. Try that again. Factor out a negative 2 only from the first two terms. So y equals negative 2. You got to watch your signs. X squared minus 4x minus 5, right? Notice that minus. Half the middle term squared is half of negative 4 is negative 2, squared is 4, but that's really a negative 8. And then when I move it over, I add 8 to both sides. So my final answer here is negative 2x minus 2 squared plus 3. Last one here, I'm just going to factor out a negative from here. That changes it to x squared plus 2x plus 5. half the middle term squared, there is a 1. But you got to watch, it's really a negative 1, so that when I add it to both sides, it's a 1. So I get y equals negative x plus 1 squared plus 6. Ta-da! Changing from standard form to graphing form.